Hello friends and fire starters, my name is TBSky and this video is a little bit of an experiment. This channel is slowly, very slowly, closing in on about 10,000 subscribers, which is a modest but respectable milestone. But it got me to thinking. When I go through my subscription feed on YouTube, I know I must have clicked subscribe on all of these channels at some point or another, but for most of them, I genuinely have no idea when, why, or even how I found them. The YouTube algorithm is a horrible Kafkian mess that rewards people with no soul or conscience for being awful so long as they do it on a regular schedule, while thoughtful, interesting, and well-crafted content gets buried behind a wall of Family Guy clips and trending Jimmy Fallon segments. Now, despite my exploding international fame at nearly 10,000 YouTube subscribers, I alone don't have the power to fix the YouTube algorithm. But what I can do, at least, is share with you 5 small channels all below 50,000 subscribers who deserve your time and attention. Number 1. Game Score Fanfare. As the name implies, Game Score Fanfare is a channel all about the music of video games. It's currently sitting at around 26,000 subscribers, which is frankly far less than it deserves, but the reason why is perhaps obvious. In 12 months, it has uploaded less than 12 videos, and the almighty algorithm is a hungry beast that must be fed regularly. What I like about Game Score Fanfare is that their videos have a strong foundation in musical theory, but it never becomes too technical or overwhelming for a layman. When they talk about arpeggios and legato and ascending minor thirds, it comes with clear examples and simple explanations, and they put music in the context of the game design it's enabling in very interesting ways. So, to give you an example and whet your appetites, here's a clip from their most popular video, How Going Underwater Changed Game Music. There's going to be a link to the full video down in the description, along with a link to their channel so you can go and subscribe.
It's hard to start anywhere else but the original water level from Super Mario Bros. The underwater theme was the first piece of music Koji Kondo composed for Super Mario Bros., and so it represents the birth of what was to become a turning point for games and their music. Koji Kondo's inspiration for the soundtrack came when seeing the Little Plumber in action. His fast, jumpy movement called for music that was exciting and energetic. But when Mario goes for a swim, he's no longer fast and agile, but slow and floaty. And the music matches. The pace is slower, notes are held for much longer, and they flow into one another much more smoothly. But the biggest change was the time signature, moving from 4/4, the most common time signature, to 3/4, which is most often associated with the waltz. It's not hard to see the inspiration here when you compare the waltz to how Mario moves when he swims, with his bouncy upward thrust and slow gliding descent. This was more than likely the first ever video game piece not in common time, and it was really the first time game music was considered outside of itself. The underwater theme wasn't just background bleeps and bloops in a computer game. It was a waltz. Koji Kondo had placed an original piece of music from a game into the greater historical context of music, and never before had it been thought about in that way, at least not on such a wide scale. The main overworld theme might have more pop culture reach, but I'd argue that the underwater theme did much more for legitimizing game music.
Number 2. Heavy-Eyed. Heavy-Eyed is a channel all about video games and game design, which is not unusual on YouTube. But what's interesting about Heavy-Eyed is the questions they ask about gaming and game design and the ways in which they answer them. Questions like, do games still need EXP points? Or what is the role of the heads-up display? Or how do you use video game mechanics to show complicated emotions or mental illness? The videos are slickly edited and well delivered and always manage to make me think interesting thoughts about the games I'm playing. Like Game Score Fanfare, even if you're not a game design nerd, the ways in which Heavy-Eyed frame their points makes the subject accessible, and they're a solid addition to your subscription inbox. To prove that point, I'm going to play you a clip from their video on experience points as a game mechanic, and if you like what you see, there will be links to the full video as well as the Heavy-Eyed YouTube channel down in the description, so you can go subscribe.
One open world game that surprised me recently with its genuine sense of progression is Breath of the Wild. After the original NES title, Zelda games have pretty much been a linear journey that allowed some deviation from the path, but the sense of character growth came from how it told the story. As things moved along, Link got stronger. It worked naturally and without the need to say, here are some points to put into abilities. Then Breath of the Wild came out and threw almost every convention Zelda games are known for out the window, and it's incredible in a lot of ways for it, allowing fluid growth of skill and knowledge through just leaving players alone to experiment with the systems placed within Hyrule, as opposed to leading them along predetermined trails to where the game wants you to be. If you've been anywhere near social media post-launch of the game, you may have noticed it was abuzz with posts, with some insane tricks usually followed by comments of, "I can't believe you can do this." Giving this kind of freedom to players really allows for self-expression within the world. Eventide Island is where you see just how far you've really grown and learnt as a player on your adventure. After spending a certain amount of time with the game before discovering the Shrine Trial, you're stripped back to basics, which means no weapons, no armor, and no items outside of your Sheikah Slate and Paraglider, tasked to complete a series of challenges like taking out 2 enemy camps and killing a boss with nothing. This quest just proves how much can be learned and how far you can progress without needing to have level ups to tell you what you can and can't do.
Number 3. Brows Held High. Brows Held High by Kyle Kalgren is, well, it's very highbrow. It's a series of video essays dealing with pop culture, mostly movies, from a very thoughtful and academical standpoint. Kalgren talks about things like the place of Black Mirror in the history of science fiction, what the power of speech meant to a silent film star like Charlie Chaplin, and has an entire month out of each year dedicated to interpretations and adaptations of Shakespeare. What I like about Brows Held High, though, is that for all its thoughtful aspirations, it never tilts over into the kind of hostile, insular elitism that the style and language of academia can often cause, even by accident. He delivers his videos with sincerity and humor, and often with a lot of genuine emotion. Whether he's talking about the creative oeuvre of subversive independent filmmakers or going on an extended tour of swearing in Shakespeare, I always come away feeling like I've spent time listening to someone tell me about something that they're really passionate about. And that, surely, is worth a subscription or two, right? For an example, here's a clip from his video, The Great Dictator, The End of Silence, and once again, the links to both the full video and the channel will be in the description.
For what it's worth, Chaplin later said that if he knew the full extent of the Holocaust, he never would have made this movie. Chaplin was 50 when he made this, the last of the vaudevillians, and he was working with the gags of the old silence. He'd done 1,000 scenarios where the plucky tramp stood up to an overwhelming brute. But it plays a bit differently when it's a Jewish man standing up to a stormtrooper.
Hail Hinkle. Who's he?
It's slapstick tyranny.
Go on, paint that.
And it's almost innocent. Oh wait, that's the wrong word. Inefficient. But Chaplin seems to know this. Chaplin keeps building the severity of the Turkmenian impression. The Keystone Cop antics give way to full-out murder. Adenoid Hinkle's words become clearer.
Democracy stunk.
Democracy is fragrant.
Liberty stunk.
Liberty is odious.
Chaplin introduces these despotic ideas in order to mock them, but at the end, he revisits them in a chilling eloquence.
Democracy, liberty, and equality are words to fool the people. No nation can progress with such ideas. They stand in the way of action. Therefore, we frankly abolish them.
Watching The Great Dictator today is to see a man slowly realize that the old order is gone. The old tactics won't work, and the old satire isn't enough. It's an artist realizing, in a ridiculously literal way, that he can't stay silent.
You speak.
Number 4. Strip Panel Naked. Okay, so I fully admit this one might be a lot more interesting to me than most people because I am a comic artist, but Strip Panel Naked is the first channel I've come across that treats comics and how they work with the same seriousness and level of nerdy interest that so many other YouTube channels reserve for movies and video games. Strip Panel Naked is a series of video essays about comics and how comics work, often focusing on panel and page layouts, stylistic choices, and subjects like how to make time seem to move more slowly in a drawing, or how to use the composition of a comic page to make a character look more powerful. Like the other channels on this list, even if you're not a technical nerd or super deep into the subject matter, the presentation and delivery of Strip Panel Naked makes its subjects interesting and easy to understand. And if you have any interest in comics at all, I recommend you give it a shot. As our example, here's a segment from his video Time Signatures in Comics and Film, comparing how the film and comic versions of Watchmen control the timing and pacing of a scene.
So the nature of time itself means this scene has to be played out differently, and it causes the entire opening structure of the film to change too, because of that. Film's weakness is that its ability to convey movement means we typically, as a mainstream audience, want to see movement. Drawing this single take out over 90 seconds would be kinda painful. In comics, we're presenting a series of still images from the scene, and we're asked by the comic to interact, because we have to read the book. So by its very existence, it forces it to be an active experience as opposed to the passive experience you get watching most films. It does mean that we're able to extend this one sequence, because each image isn't moving and vanishing at the same time as processing any voiceover information we're also getting. We can read these individual images and all the content that's packed into them, the strange shape of the vehicles, the signage, the blood, the sign, the man carrying the sign, the expression of the man cleaning the blood off the sidewalk. All of that can be read without the image rushing past you. And so what you're experiencing as a reader here is a giant combination of messages and theme. We're learning the distance from the badge all the way up to the broken window, we're seeing how the world is different and how it's subtly different. We're seeing the man walking with the sign through the blood as time passes, and we're seeing the man shouting at him who's trying to clean up the sidewalk. It means we're experiencing all of this and able to ask the question about each of these in particular. Why did that man walk through the blood? Why is the guy who works at the shop the one who's cleaning the blood up from the sidewalk? Why do those cars look different? And importantly, wow, that window is a long way up. And I'm not even including the narration here for a direct example. And so when we see the same sequence in film, what do we learn here? What questions are we able to ask, and what's our takeaway? Whereas with the comic it was a real multitude of things, if you wanted it to be, at this speed and pace we're getting little more than the contextual understanding that this is a city and that this is quite high up. And it means each moment is actually fleeting, each visual ends up meaning less and having less agency and power, because we're quickly moving on to the next thing. In comics, you're working with the power of a budget-free, entirely visual approach to the way of telling your story, and it means each image can be packed with incredibly dense visuals that are easy enough to refer back to, and you can exploit this active audience. And I think that raises an interesting point about time and rhythm, because in this panel, the narration is not running at the same speed as the visuals, as it would have to in film, in which everything is synchronous. So the time signatures of these events, the visuals and the narration, they're not perfectly matched up. The time existing in this panel is not the same time it would take for you to read all of that narration. And this allows a certain flexibility and freedom that cinema does not have in the same way.
Number 5. Ports Sender. Okay, so this one is technically cheating a little bit, since Ports Sender is currently housed on the Film Joy YouTube channel, which has over 80,000 subscribers, but back when it had its own YouTube channel, it only hit about 10,000 subscribers, and it doesn't get, that many views even on the new channel, so I'm including it anyway. Ports Sender is a unique kind of video game show, because, as you might guess from the name, it's a show all about ports. It's a show about games being translated to different systems and different system requirements, and all the changes and compromises that arise from that process. Outside of the historical interest of seeing how video games change from one system to another, the show also unearths some sometimes deeply fascinating connections, like how a terrible port of the 1984 arcade game Marble Madness ties into the entire history of the Sony PlayStation. At other times, the host, Ben Patton, brings a very personal approach to his storytelling, and the episode on the Super Nintendo port of SimCity is genuinely rather touching, and definitely worth a subscription to support. As our example, here's a piece from his video on the Mega Man Anniversary Collection.
Meanwhile, Mega Man 7 was a Super Nintendo exclusive, and while emulating the Super Nintendo isn't especially difficult, you're probably emulating a Super Nintendo right now without even realizing it. Mega Man 8 was released for the PS1 and the Saturn, which are much trickier systems to reproduce, and Capcom probably reasoned that if they're going to go to the trouble of reporting one of them, they may as well do them both, which means that Mega Man 7 and 8 get brand spanking new ports. This isn't the first time Capcom have done this with a Mega Man anthology though. It isn't even the second time. It's the fourth. The first attempt was Mega Man The Wily Wars for the Sega Genesis, which aimed to give the first 3 Mega Man games the Super Mario All-Stars treatment, bumping up the visuals, giving the music a fresh coat of paint, and throwing in an entirely unnecessary time travel story to justify having to replay these 3 games on another platform. Okay, alright. If you haven't heard of this one, don't be surprised. It only saw a retail release in Europe, Australia, and Japan, and never received a retail release in the US, instead being transmitted via Sega Channel, a sort of proto-broadband service specifically for the Genesis that lets Sega transmit games to subscribers' consoles. So be wary of any US copies of the Wily Wars you see floating around on eBay, they're probably fake. The Sega Channel was a fascinating piece of kit, but as with most add-ons for the Sega Genesis, it wasn't as popular as Sega would have liked and didn't last very long as a result. I'd love to make a joke about Sega's failures here, but they beat me to it when they made the Sega Saturn.
Hey, it's the end of the video. As usual, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you found some interesting new YouTube channels to follow. This was a bit of an experiment because I'm searching for a video format I can do that doesn't take as long to put together as my fully animated video essays, but which also doesn't ramble on for quite as long as my unscripted rambles to camera. As usual, leave your comments down below if you have any ideas for like types of videos you'd like to see, or hey, if you have a small YouTuber you follow who you think is really good and needs more exposure, I'd love to know about them. Let's spread the love around. Cheers!